Now I've restrained myself. I'm sorry. Step back into the role.
That's right.
The moderator, and Ishmael Beah, please, is the next, our child. Ishmael, it's your turn. Your turn, Ishmael's turn.
All right. Good morning, everyone. And I also want to follow by saying that I am honored to be on this remarkable panel. And I've also been honored to be in the audience over the last few days to listen to some remarkable people who are doing work to change the world. Before I start with my own remarks, I just want to follow up very quickly about the question that was asked from our colleague. To say that I think oftentimes when people hear about problems that are going on in other parts of the world, they think of it in isolation. They don't consider that actually there is a global dimension to it. For example, in Sierra Leone, my country, where we had a civil war for a little over 10 years, we had a lot of natural resources, and there were people who were interested in exploiting those natural resources during the context of our wars. And also, we don't have weapons. We had weapons that were being brought in from all parts of the world, including from the United States. Now, I'm not giving you research. I was in the Army and I fought as a child, so I know the weapons that I used. And I know some of them were coming from the US. People were willing to sell them. But I think what we forget is that when we look at these problems, as our sister from Liberia said, is that we think these things just happen overnight. People just get up in the morning. They have people who strategically benefit from some of these problems that are happening in the world. And when it comes time to prosecute people, we go after only the people internally who caused the problem. For example, in Sierra Leone, the external actors are left alone. And of course, they're going to continue to go other places and do this, so we don't have peace in the world because of that. Justice is not there, so there is no peace. Now, to my own remarks, I, in my very short life, have had have been able to experience perhaps the worst and the best sides of human nature, or the human condition. As a young boy growing up in my country, I experienced what it meant to be in a peaceful community. But then at some point I was, due to circumstances, I was dragged to actually be engaged in a war and bringing violence to other people. So when I get involved in speaking about how essential peace is in the world, it is not something that I take very lightly, because I know what the absence of peace is in one's life and what that looks like. So I'm not, this is why this is very, very important to me. But I'll start from the beginning, which I grew up in a very small community in Sierra Leone, in a very remote part of my country, in a village. And when I was a boy at a young age, there was a very strong sense of community. When you were a boy, you realized that anyone who was older than you was responsible for you. Could be your mother, your father, or your aunt. And you also realize that your life is not only left to your mother and father, but everyone in the community. How you behave affects everybody else. So as a kid growing up also, there was a tradition that I think is missing in the world now, which was an oral tradition that brought about an act of listening deeply to another person. And I think oftentimes in my own life now, I realize that people do not have that capacity. You will speak to people, but they've already decided what they want to hear. So they will actually not hear what you're saying at all. And as a child growing up, I had all of these foundations within me, and because of that, I believe that even during the time of war, when things were difficult, and I lost some of that, that foundation was still rooted deep within me. And I think where we don't have that foundation to know how my actions impact other people, how to listen deeply to other people, we are missing that essential antidote that can actually prevent violence, that can allow us to have the resilience to recover from certain things. And I think one of these things are missing in the world. And I think we need to bring them back. And one of the problems that I've seen by living in this culture is the absence of a relationship between the younger and the older generation. One of the things that shocked me mostly when I came to live in the United States was that you don't see very many old people around. Where I grew up as a child, you see old people all the time, and they will sit you down, you have no choice, and they will tell you about the mistakes they've made and so on and so forth. Granted, every tradition has its negatives, and you can get rid of that. But I think those passing on knowledge down to younger generation and allowing people at a very young age, giving them the opportunity to use the skill set through oral tradition, through being involved in the community, through listening actively, allows them to become part of a society, part of a community, and think beyond just their own lives, but with other people's lives as well. Now, to move that forward on a global scale, what I want to talk about is that I believe that peace in the world is possible. I have no other choice but to have hope for that. But I am not also illusioned to think that it is a simple thing that can be achieved by just wishing for it. We need to work very hard. We need to challenge ourselves very strongly. We need to actually uncomfortably change some of our lifestyles, the way we think, how we think of other people. We need to get into certain areas of our lives that are very uncomfortable to be able to have peace in the world. If not, I think we're only going to gloss over it. And one of the things that I've seen is this. There is still, in a lot of us, even people who proclaim themselves as liberals and so on and so forth, there is still a belief that some lives are more valuable than others. And if that thinking continues in our mindset, no matter what rhetoric we have about peace, about how we want to change the world, it's not going to change, because genuinely we do not believe that others' lives are as valuable as ours. And we've seen how that comes into decision-making about people's lives. Congressman Payne mentioned about what was going on in Rwanda. If that was going on, say, in New Jersey or in California, there would have been different circumstances. People would have reacted differently. There is still that belief, and I've seen it in my work with the United Nations Surveyors, that people believe that other lives are more important than others. And people make decisions. And even the way the news is presented. For example, when there was a bombing in Kenya, one time at the American Embassy, there was more news, which is not bad. This is the United States, and I feel for the people who lost their lives, who are Americans. But there was more news about the few Americans who lost their lives than the hundreds of Kenyans whose lives were lost. That was not newsworthy at all. So when you see these kinds of things, that is a verbal violence that people may not want to speak about. So I believe until we all, in our various lives, really come to understand that our lives, the value of it is the same, regardless of where we are, the conditions in which we live those lives, the sacrosanct nature of our lives is the same. We need to get to that. Another part that, two last points that I will make. One thing that I've seen also is this idea of knowledge. I think over the last however many years, people have come to believe that the only knowledge that is important, valuable, and must be used to change the world is the knowledge that you gain through education, through going to school. Now, there are other kinds of knowledge that is not through going to school and being educated that are equally, if not more valuable than actually being in school. For example, I always say to people, there's certain intelligence that you have that you cannot get in school at all. And that intelligence, if, for example, I always joke around with people, my grandmother, because she's very connected to the reality of our life, she can step out in the morning and she'll put her hand out and she will tell you exactly that when your shadow reaches this part of your body, it will rain at this particular time. You cannot get that on the Weather Channel or Google. This is very true. But that knowledge is belittled because it doesn't have a master's, a BA, or PhD. So what happens now in the world that I've seen is that because of that belittling of other kinds of knowledge and how important they are, we have people in positions of power who make decisions about our world who have no connection to the realities of our world. And so when they make those decisions, of course, we're not going to have peace in the world at all, because they're completely removed from the realities that I just spoke about. I grew up as a young boy in a village where I knew where the source of my food was coming from, where I knew about how the environment functions based on how human beings function in that environment. I didn't need, later on, many years now, this has become quite the research that everybody is doing about how you should eat healthy and eat naturally. We knew that already from before. So what I'm saying is that we need to close that gap, and I know my time is coming up, to know that we need to make sure that we respect every human being's intelligence, because every human being has an innate intelligence, whether they go to school or not. They do have an innate intelligence. So until some of these things that I've mentioned, until we speak about those and we're willing to have that uncomfortable conversation with ourselves, we're not going to have peace in the world.
Thank you, Ishmael. Thank you, Ishmael. Absolutely. Your personal example and your courage is an inspiration to all of us. There's no doubt about it. Thank you. Thank you. Your personal courage and example is an enormous inspiration to all of us. And carrying along in that same, in a similar level, a totally moving and unbelievably wonderful expression of the power of the individual to make change. Leymah, please share with us your story.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor for me to be here today on this panel with very remarkable people to talk about peace in the world. But I will jump on Ishmael's comment of starting conversations about uncomfortable issues. And the uncomfortable issue in our world today is the issue of women. Their rights, the way they are objectified, their roles in leadership and decision making, and how they are viewed by men. I sit here making no apologies as an African feminist, if you're giving degrees in the order of your life experience. I have a BA in being a refugee. I have a master's in going through violence. But most importantly, I have a PhD in organizing women.
You do.
And most of the time, I tell people that my organizing skills is not limited to continent or to a region or to a place. And it's good that Congressman Payne is here, because if I walk out there and saw a man assault a woman, I would jump in. And the next thing you will hear is, why is this African woman getting involved? Because the issue of women's rights has surpassed the issues of borders and countries and continents. My story is the story of every woman who's lived in conflict, whether it's a civil war or it's domestic violence. I grew up in a community where, like Ishmael, an urban community, but with a very rural flavor to it. We had different ethnic groups, different religious groups, and we were taught about the values of human life. I grew up, my favorite Liberian meal is actually the food from my Muslim household, my neighbors. Where I grew up, when it was 5 o'clock, wherever you found yourself is where you were going to take your bath. And when you fell asleep, they brought you home to your parents. My friend Asatu just lost her mother in September, and I called and said, when I come to Monrovia, I'm coming. They were having the 3 days feast. Got to the feast, and by the time I sat down, they brought me fufu and coconut soup. They remembered from my growing up days that this is the meal, and this is a typical Muslim household meal in Liberia. But all of a sudden, this changed in 1989 when we had the Civil War. And I grew up seeing my community diminish from that community of trust and hope, where women's lives were valued, to the community where women's bodies, wars were fought on. And for many years, we endured this kind of lifestyle. But the news is it wasn't just Liberia. It was Rwanda, it was Sierra Leone, it was other places in parts of the world. What I did, I don't think it's anything extraordinary. A group of women and myself just got fed up. We got fed up with little boys having their hands in our underwears. We got fed up with our children being recruited and taken to fight. We got fed up with just seeing our community sink so deeply to the point that the international media had now called us a failed state, a state where neighbors had ended up eating all of their neighbors' dog and they were now scavenging for snails in dirt. We got fed up. And what we did was to stand up to the madness. Those psychopaths, detectors, they are all psychopaths. And we said to our President Taylor at the time, you go to peace talks. If you don't, we will continue to protest until you kill us all. Protest we did, peace we got. And then, like I've heard, many people ask different people, and Jody spoke about this in Oslo when we were there just this week or last week. People saying, how did you do it? This is such a remarkable thing. It is not rocket science. You don't have to go to the space station to learn how to organize. I tell you one thing, and I'm speaking directly to the women in this room, and I make no apologies, men. Until you rise up, whether it's the objectification of your daughter on the US media as sex objects, whether it's the abuse in your community, whether it's the domestic violence that rates continue to go high and high, whether it's those patriarchal laws that are oppressing and suppressing women, until women take a stand to change their communities, no one, you can have the most gender-sensitive president, it will never happen for you. Everyone so proudly talks about the Arab Spring. Everyone so proudly talks about the uprising in Egypt. No one talks about the sad story of the spring. When women came out on March 8th to celebrate, they were beaten off the streets by the very men that they protested side by side a few weeks earlier. This is just a typical example of how you need to take your destiny as women in your hands. Last 2 nights, someone from Iran told us a story of how when the revolution took place in Iran, the women were so involved. And then a few weeks later, the law came out. And that law said stoning of women and beating of women. And the Iranian women said, this can never happen. Let's give it a few weeks. It's been years, and it's happening. This is just to show you that until we step out and do what we're supposed to do as women, it's not going to come to us. The UN has resolution 1325, 1820. We'll continue to count the numbers of resolutions that speaks about women's rights and women's issues. Countries have quota systems and different things, but every day you step outside of this building, the reality is the oppression and suppression of women. If we must have world peace, if we must enjoy world peace, this half of the world's population, men, must be involved. You know, I'll end here. On my flight from Norway to New Jersey, I listened to John Legend's version of Wake Up Everybody. And for the first time, that song meant something to me. The world will get no better if we just let it be. Women, your world will get no better if you just let it be. Thank you.
Thank you, Leymah. Thank you, Leymah. Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you, Leymah. There's a New Zealand woman named Marilyn Waring who wrote a book, she's a sociologist, who wrote a book called Counting for Nothing, The Labor of Women. I recommend it to everyone to read. It is a wake-up call. It is a wake-up call. Now, Amandine Roche from France originally, but lately from Kabul. Amandine, your turn.
Thank you very much, actually. Thank you, Gandan. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Rachel, for organizing this amazing Peace Education Summit. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to be part of this amazing panel. And thank you for all of you for such inspiration, actually. Well, actually, I just wanted to share with you today my experience in Afghanistan. I lived there for the last 10 years. And actually, I reached the point after 10 years that non-violence is not the best way, but the only way for Afghanistan to bring peace. Well, it's true, Afghanistan is a very violent country, and I've been victim of this violence. By experience, I mean, I've been detained by Taliban, exchanged by Taliban, harassed by Mujahideen. My friend have been injured, kidnapped, assassinated. But I still do believe the only way for this country is non-violence. And I have to tell you that the soil of Afghanistan is ready to welcome the non-violence. All the Afghan people I met, and this is a reason why I'm still going back in this country, they are very peaceful. Peaceful in the sense that they incarnate the values of peace. They are very compassionate, hospitable, tolerant, passionate, fearless. They overcome so many suffering, and they are thirsty for peace. They are fed up, tired of fighting. Not only simple Afghan, ordinary people, but also the fighters, the Taliban are tired, actually. 25 years of war. So actually, I do believe that, yes, this seed of peace is ready, but depends how do we water it. And if we come with Kalashnikov and with tank, of course we will wake up the wire side of each human being. So I do believe, and this is why we are all here today, that education, of course, is the key. You become who you are thanks to your education. The empty cup depends on what you feed them. Violence, non-violence. And actually, so it's true, if we want to bring lasting peace, we have to focus on all this education program. So over the last 10 years, I've been head of a civic education program with United Nations Department of Peacekeeping. And I have to say, we made a remarkable work with Afghan civic educators, mainly to empower women, because after the Taliban regime, they were so scared to go out. So we did a job like door-to-door campaign, going with Afghan civic educators just to encourage women to participate to public life and to take the right and to take the lead and to tell them, yes, you have a right to vote. You have the same right as the mullah, as your president, as your father, as your brother. Go for that, go. Give them back the right and the confidence to be part of this political scene. But what makes me very sad, actually, after each election, they stop the program. And I say, how do you want to see the flower? We see this seed of peace, of human rights, actually. But if we do not water them, we will never harvest these beautiful flowers. And actually, I say, well, in this case, I should stop complaining and I should act. So with some of my Afghan colleagues, Afghan friends, we decided to create Nurina. Nurina means, Shirin Ebadi knows, the light to face this darkness, actually. And we create this foundation, which means Nurina, and to promote the culture of peace and non-violence. And we, with my Afghan colleague, one of them is former Al-Qaeda member, actually. But he became convinced by non-violence, and he completely shifted. Before blowing himself, he said, if maybe the 72 virgins that they promised me are not true, and he shifted. He shifted and he joined us, actually, and I have to say, I'm glad to have him with us, because he knows how to have access to this madrasa, where they take this small boy, 12 years old, and they feed them with all this Islamic extremist values just to make suicide bomb attack. So actually, we design beautiful civic education, human rights, anti-corruption, peace, and non-violent education program to offer it to the Ministry of Education. We create a non-violence week as well. We want to organize beautiful Sufi concert because I do believe in the power of Sufism in Afghanistan. It's very peaceful. But I have to tell you, I've been very surprised. We received so many promises from the donors, the stakeholders. And after a few months, they say, you know what, finally, we are going to put our money in the Middle East. Finally, we have to go to the tsunami in Japan, or finally, maybe next year, or finally. So I say, but where is the priority? I'm wondering what's the priority. Now, when you look at the figures, you know how much Americans spend in the war in Afghanistan per month? $1.2 billion. This is insane. This is where your taxes are going. So actually, react. This is unacceptable. You know how much our civic education program costs? Only 6 hours. Oh, wow. So now I'm wondering, actually, well, I was very happy when Mr. Obama got the Peace Nobel Prize. But now I'm wondering, because you know in 2014, actually, international troops will withdraw from Afghanistan. And I'm wondering which Afghanistan they will let if they do not focus on education. So now I'm asking Mr. Obama, actually, if he can make a symbolic gesture. In July, he will withdraw 30,000 troops. If he can transfer some money from the army, from the war, to this peaceful education program. Not us, but just to make just to prove that he deserves a Peace Nobel Prize, actually. And actually, and I have to say, oh, it's finished. Oh my God. Well, there is 5 million kids who do not go to school as well. So this is where we are. Just, I want to go briefly back the fact that because peace doesn't cost anything, and peace starts within yourself, we decided to make some meditation class, actually, for Taliban commander. And, and let me just tell you quickly this example, because it's quite interesting one. I've been working with Commander Roberta last year. You can Google him, you will see he's a real warrior, actually. You will see how many people he killed. And I've been amazed because he came to me to complain about the fact that there is so much corruption and he might not get a seat at the National Assembly. And I said, oh, it's interesting. You want to become Democrat now? You want? He said, yes, I'm tired of fighting. I'm grandfather and I want to take care of my kids. And actually, I asked him, who is your peaceful leader? And he said, it's Abdul Ghaffar Khan. And Abdul Ghaffar Khan, you may know him, is just an amazing man who raised his army on 100,000 non-violent soldiers. So I say, wait a minute. If your hero is Abdul Ghaffar Khan, why not you shift on non-violence? And he said, yes, but what my friend will think about me. So I say, well, but okay, maybe they will laugh, but maybe after they will follow you. So be an example of that, and you will become Commander non-Rockety.
Thank you.
So that's
Thank you, Amandine. We all look forward to the day when we will have a peacemaking education conference at your Center for Nonviolence and Peace in Kabul. And we'll all go with maybe a little security, with Leymah guarding us and protecting us. Yes, quickly.
I thought that was fabulous. But the problem that we're facing is that there's a set of ideas behind this madness. One of the ideas is that by preparing for peace, war comes. And by preparing for war, peace is established. So the military model of pursuing security steals $1.5 trillion a year from the children of the world. There are mothers today deciding which child will be fed and which child won't be. Absolutely unnecessary. Half the world living on less than $2 a day. Absolutely unnecessary. The resources are there, but the resources are not allocated because there's the belief that security is the precondition for development. So the military steps in, but when you look at it, and I would say if they were right, spend away. $50 billion a year for nuclear weapons. Spend away. But the point is, there is no military solution for Kashmir. There is no military solution for Palestine, Israel. There is no military solution in Chechnya. There is no military solution in Afghanistan and Iraq. It is human security that we have to define as security. And people say, how do you do that? Well, there is a program called the Millennium Development Goals, which is based really on the Marshall Plan, and it deals with equality of women, childhood education, dealing with these issues, and we don't hear about it in the media. We don't hear about it because Westinghouse owns one of the networks. They make weapons. GE owns another network. And that's why we have to speak out on this and change the paradigm from pursuing the security of states through militarism through meeting human needs.
Thank you, John. Thank you.